Will you take the screen down, James, please? Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another of our Three Nations Dementia Working Group webinars. We're all happy to be here this morning. We've had a wonderful summer. We've had a little break and enjoyed all of the smashing weather. And now it's back to every fortnight producing these webinars for you. My name is Nigel, and as my back screen says, I'm the chair of the Three Nations Working Group, and today's theme of the webinar is adjusting to a diagnosis. The impact of a dementia diagnosis for someone recently diagnosed is likely to experience a range of emotions, from shock, fear, disbelief, and in some cases even relief, because suddenly you've got an answer to some unanswered questions. But each person is different, and the way a person reacts and adjusts their lives to their diagnosis is often shaped by their personality, personal history. People that are dealing with dementia are dealing with a disability that is hidden from view, and this is confusing and difficult for the person with dementia and those around them. If you understand that most common difficulties that people with dementia struggle with, you will get a better understanding of the person you want to get to know. We've got a panel to help us this morning on adjusting to a diagnosis, and I'll let them introduce themselves as we go along. I'd like to remind you that these webinars rely on you. We need your comments, responses, and questions via the text boxes, which you find at the bottom of the screen, and the question and answer boxes. If you put your hands up, we won't see you, so you won't be able to answer your question. We won't be able to respond to everything, but we will try and signpost where possible. I want to remind you that these webinars are designed by people living with dementia and produced and presented by the same groups. So that's enough for me, and I'm going to bring in our first speaker, and I'm going to let him introduce himself. This is Keith Oliver, and he's going to tell a very personal story on how he adjusts to his diagnosis. Good morning, Keith.
Good morning, Nigel, and thank you for that. And good morning, everyone in the audience today. Yes, my name is Keith Oliver, and I live in the ancient city of Canterbury. And although diagnosed as a young chap, I increasingly feel a bit more ancient as the years go by. And today I'm in reflective mood. So what I'm going to do whilst in this reflective mood is to try and give you all a sense of a conversation I may have with my younger self, taking the idea if I knew then what I know now, might be useful for me to share with you this morning, since it's now 13 years since this young bloke was diagnosed with dementia, age 55. Well, firstly, I would say to my junior youthful self to live in the day and to seek opportunities to connect to activities and people which I enjoy and enjoy the involvement with. Alongside this, not to be too judgmental of myself and others, especially negatively, because during those early days when one was diagnosed, I was quite judgmental of myself. I did feel bad about the situation I was in. I wasn't depressed, but I understood and recognized that this diagnosis was going to change my life, and how I was going to come to terms with that was going to define the rest of my life that lay ahead of me. So beyond the current day, I would also say develop a routine and plan for one or two things in the near future, say the current week or fortnight, and then do what you can to ensure these will happen. I'd be cautious and advise myself to be cautious about planning too far ahead, as the consequence can be almost wishing your life away or creating something that you're going to forget because it's too far ahead. I remember when diagnosed on New Year's Eve 2010, at that time, the London Olympics was very much in the focus. And there was encouragement for people to enter a lottery to get tickets to go and watch the Olympics. And living in Canterbury wasn't much of a ride into Stratford to get to see the Olympics, a one-off opportunity. But I convinced myself that I would be too sick, too affected by dementia in 2 years' time, that I wouldn't be well enough to go. So I didn't enter the lottery and watched it on the television. And here we are, 11 years after the Olympics, and I'm speaking with you this morning. Maybe I should have done that back then. But also not to take regrets, not to hold on to these things and regret what you have done and you haven't done. Regret is a forceful, negative thing in one's life, and I'd always try and avoid that. Again, that would be advice back to my young self. When diagnosed, the consultant said to me, in answer to my question, how long had I got before I presented as a stereotypical person with dementia? Well, she scratched her head and unsurprisingly said she didn't know. I wasn't accepting that answer. So I pressed her and said, well, please give me your best professional guess. To which she answered, 3 to 5 years. That again was back in February 2011. So not to say you're wrong, I proved you wrong, but also just to say, think what will work for you. Listen to the professionals, process what they say, what you hear, and from that, take what's useful to you and discard what isn't. My approach to that conversation with the consultant sat very much firmly in my DNA of myself, because my background is that I was brought up in a slum with an outside toilet in the yard, no garden, a back-to-back terrace in a poor area of Nottingham. My world was black and white, no colour. Fortunately, at the age of 6, my family got out of that place and we moved to a council estate. Then my world turned to colour, but still expectations were low. I went to a secondary school where basically we were factory fodder. And I remember going to an interview age 15 or 16 and being told that that's where my life lay. A bit like the consultant, really. I didn't take what that person said to me as a 15-year-old. I wanted something better. I wanted something different. I processed what they said and I discarded it. And then at the age of 18, managed to somehow, absolutely amazingly, get into university. The first person in my family. Surprised everybody, including myself. So from having a background of living in a house with no inside toilet, no bathroom, no shower, to a house now where I have 3 toilets, 2 bathrooms. In fact, I nearly called my biography No Loos to 3 Loos, because maybe that tracks my story. So those would be the things I would say, some of the things I would say to my younger self. I thought in the days and weeks following diagnosis that I was the only person with a diagnosis age 55. One answer to this was to read information online and in books. Some was helpful, other things less so. Again, I tried to absorb what was useful and discard what wasn't, in order to empower and inform me. Alongside this, I would always advise people to look for peer support. And I do sincerely wish that the 3 Nations Dementia Working Group was there for me back then, during my wilderness days. It's there now for other travellers treading the same steps that I did back then and adjusting to a diagnosis. That's what I would tell my younger self. Alongside that, James, could you share the picture of my favourite flower, please? Now, as a keen gardener, flowers mean a lot to me. And this particular flower means even more than those growing in my garden. Quite early into my period of association with a diagnosis, I came across this model. And to be perfectly honest with you all, I try and live my life by that model. I carry it everywhere with me in my diary. I recognize the importance of attachment, inclusion, occupation, identity, comfort, and at the center of everything, love. All those things that make up that flower would have made my life so much better as I was coming to terms with this diagnosis. They have since, and they continue to do so now. And I'm using that model to help me and a psychologist friend write a new book, which will hopefully be out early in the new year, and which some of you have helped me write by telling me and my friend how you live your life through that model too. It was written and created by Tom Kitwood back in 1997 in his seminal book, Dementia Reconsidered. I commend it to you all, whether you have a diagnosis or whether you're working in the field of dementia. Take it off now, James, please. As a manager and leader in the world of education, I did recognise the need for able supporters to help me professionally. But usually it was others seeing me as a rock or as a positive force. Since being diagnosed, I would always advise to seek support, and for professionals, whether working for a charity, such as the Alzheimer's Society, the NHS, or a university, who almost certainly do care about people with dementia, to really show they care. And for people like me to seek and benefit from this. It's insufficient to care. You need to show the people who you're caring for and about that you genuinely and sincerely do care about them as individuals. I'm going to pause there and invite any questions before I conclude my talk. Nigel, is there any questions come in?
Not so much questions, but people. Chris Maddox, I find it useful to concentrate on things that we can still do. On things we can still do whilst living with dementia. I don't concentrate on the things we can no longer do. It is so easy to beat ourselves up unnecessarily, which is the theme of your chat. Coming from a family, this is from Julie Hayden, coming from a family with no university background, I was the first person to get there at 40. It's never too late, even after diagnosis. I reconnected with universities through research and educating professionals. It supports me and I've continued to be useful. And Steve Kennedy, well spoken, Keith. A PMA will certainly help you to carry you through. You are almost certainly a fighter and will not allow your diagnosis to define you. The spirit among people living with dementia is something I find thoroughly uplifting and wonderful to see. Now, I've got a comment to make to you, Keith, a question to ask you. We all know Kate Swaffer, love her or hate her, love her or like her. She comes up with some incredible stuff. And one of the things that I always quote, but I sometimes don't attribute the quote to her, is this prescribed disablement and diagnosis, which is just neatly what you talked about there. We all get the dull ringing in the ears, don't we? And then the welcome back to dementia, the three foolscap A4 left pieces of paper which tell you where the local resources are. But when you get home, your life has changed irrevocably. in your own head, but you're still the same person that walked in that room before the diagnosis, aren't you? That hasn't changed.
Sure.
And, you know, is it a different way to deliver a diagnosis, I guess, is my question.
Okay. I think that's a really good question, Nigel, about the delivery of the diagnosis. And in some ways, it sets the scene for what's to follow. And the way that you handle that, and anyone who's with you, close to you, as spouse or family member or close friend, it will also determine to an extent how they cope with those early days as well. And I guess we're going to hear that from Karen Karen shortly. But just to say, I think that living with dementia, I knew it would be challenging, and adjusting to it is challenging. There's no question about that. There's no getting away from it. And we all aspire to live well with it. And some days we succeed, and other days we're less successful in living well with it. So that living well label shouldn't be a rod for our back. It should be something that, you know, we applaud and we celebrate and we enjoy when we're able to do it. But it shouldn't be what defines as an omission in our day. We should take the day as it comes and see what transpires. And those challenges that one faces with dementia, if you can possibly, and I know many friends who have dementia, and I try and help them with this too, if you can try and redefine those challenges in the sense of setting up creative and positive challenges, not to replace the negative ones, they don't do that, but they help deal with the negative challenges, then I think that's really important as well. In my case, it's been around writing, it's been around painting, it's been around photography. Doing things creative have really helped me deal with those fundamental and severe challenges that I face and sometimes disguise from people who don't know me particularly.
Yeah, I mean,
I think that's really important, Nigel. And linked to that, if I could just finish,
yeah,
my mother had Alzheimer's, so my connection to this wretched embuggerance, as Terry Pratchett used to call it, goes back a long time before I was diagnosed too, and it scared me a bit as well to see it in my mother. So that coloured, in a sense, the way that I adjusted to it and dealt with it, because I was going to do it differently to her, because she struggled, and she struggled a lot more than I did, and her progression into the disease was much more rapid than mine because she struggled. And each person is different, and each person's dementia is different. So I do know it from a number of sides, and I do recognise how hard it can be. There's no getting away from that. And lastly, just to go back to you with the word being defined by dementia, I'm going to finish with a story. This is a story I've told before, so it may be that one or two people have heard it before, but I make no apologies. Around about 6 or 7 years ago, I did miss the children because I was a head teacher and a teacher for many, many years. So for a number of years, I used to go in and hear children read in my local school. And one particular day, not long after I'd done an article for a local health magazine, I was approached by a child who was aged 8. His name was Lewis, and I was about to hear him read. And he came up to me and he said, I saw you in a magazine. And I thought, hello, this sounds as though we're going to get involved now in a conversation with an 8-year-old about dementia. And I didn't tell the kids I had dementia. As far as they were concerned, I was just this old bloke who used to be a head teacher from another school, who came in, made a fuss of them, heard them read, and then buggered off at the end of it. So what he said to me was really quite profound. He said to me, well, I saw you in this magazine. And I said, did you, Lewis? That's interesting. What did you think? He said, I know your first name. And the article was headed, Dementia Doesn't Define Me, says Keith Oliver. And I thought, well, from the wisdom of a child, there comes wisdom.
yeah.
Because he didn't define me by dementia. He now knew my first name.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's important, because that's a great way to finish, Keith, because I think the lesson here is that we must refuse to be defined by a dementia.
That's the best way to adjust, Nigel.
Yeah, you know, it is, and the broad brush approach will never work, because we're all different people. Well, thank you very much, Keith. I'm certain that we'll come back to you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Keith. Our next interview is Karen Gibbs from the princely town of Penarth, just up the corner from me.
Oh, yeah.
Good morning, Karen.
Good morning, Nigel. Thank you for inviting me today. And good morning to everybody. So my name is Karen and I live in South Wales, in Penarth, just south of Cardiff. And I care for my husband. So my husband, Nick, was diagnosed with young onset dementia 9 years ago in 2014, when he, like Keith, was 55 years old. So this diagnosis came after 2 or 3 years of referrals due to memory and orientation problems, which had until then been put down to anxiety. So how did I, as his wife, adjust to this diagnosis? Well, I have to say that it came as more of a relief than a shock, because we could at last understand what we had to deal with. Adjusting to the diagnosis of the condition which Nick is facing hasn't been easy and is 9 years on, still in progress. Nick's dementia was diagnosed by a neurologist, and for the first 2.5 years, we were offered no further support other than the 6 monthly consultations. I found that period extremely difficult. The responsibility for taking on the care of my husband rested on me. The dementia was slowly but surely robbing Nick of the skills for living. Even at the time of diagnosis, he was quickly losing the ability to read and write. He had difficulty planning and remembering, and his driving license was almost immediately withdrawn. I became fully occupied trying to take on and manage all the areas of our life which Nick had taken care of. It was a tremendous strain, and on top of all the overwhelming emotions brought about by that diagnosis, and the realization that our life would never be the same again. During those initial 2.5 years, our lives were turned upside down. We were at the stage when our 3 children were almost independent, and Nick was at the height of his career. It soon became quite clear that he wouldn't be able to continue to work, and so our prospects changed completely. I dealt with this by fully addressing all the financial and legal implications as best I could, and by retreating to our home, where we felt safe and could continue a cozy life together. For me, this was the antidote to some of the overwhelming emotions I was feeling, the fear of the future and how I would cope, the anger that our lives would change totally, and the fact that we were now no longer independent of each other within our relationship, and the grief of having to watch my intelligent, resourceful, animated, loving husband, my best friend, becoming so disengaged and withdrawn and dependent on me. I felt very isolated. I found it difficult to explain to others what was happening to us, and I didn't really know where to turn for help. So after 2.5 years, I eventually asked the neurologist for practical help. And he referred us to the Young Onset Dementia Service at the Memory Clinic. This was the beginning of the real adjustment to the diagnosis of dementia for me. Nick was invited to a variety of support groups to help him face his diagnosis, and I was glad to see him engaging with those activities. He has always, and still does, take a positive approach to the situation. And it was Nick who asked for support for me. I was invited to a consultation with the psychologist on the young onset dementia team. Initially, I was offered a one-to-one course called START, Strategies for Relatives, which aims to support the development of coping strategies for those who care for a loved one with dementia. The course consisted of a set of 8 90-minute sessions focusing on practical ways to managing the challenging behaviour of someone with dementia, how to deal with the difficult situations, as well as how to deal with the overwhelming emotions which well up day after day. I learnt grounding techniques and relaxation methods. This has been immensely useful in helping me come to terms with Nick's diagnosis and managing a way forward for the both of us. About a year later, I was asked whether I needed further help, and I have ever since had regular sessions in narrative therapy with the psychologist on the young onset dementia team. She knows our situation very well. The sessions help me deal with the difficulties I face at any particular time. I'm able to talk to her openly about the issues I have in my changing relationship with my husband. I know that I won't be judged or presented with futile advice. It's a chance for me to devote all my thoughts to my own emotions. I'm encouraged to assess the turmoil I sometimes find myself in and find ways to untangle and address it, often by considering past events in my life or remembering people who have supported or influenced me. This helps me understand what is most important to me at the time and to find a way forward which is totally acceptable to me. It helps me to appreciate the things that Nick and I can still do together. We can still dance together. We can enjoy our dinner together each evening with the music that's always been meaningful to us. We go for slow walks together, and we like sitting together in our garden, and above all, share time with our family. We also take part in several creative arts therapy activities each week, arranged by various support groups. The narrative therapy sessions are completely draining emotionally, but they offer me a release from the tension which builds up in caring for someone with dementia. There's a much needed emotional release. And afterwards, I feel positive and able to carry on caring for my husband in a positive way. Without these sessions, I think my own health would suffer. Dementia is a very long and relentless illness. The adjustment to its diagnosis is ongoing. I constantly need to adapt as Nick's needs become more demanding. There is a lot of grief, fear, and anger, but there's also a lot of love. And this love is what gets us through and keeps us adjusting. We've been living together with dementia for 9 years now, and we still continue to adjust to it.
Thank you, Karen. I mean, that's there's so much to unpack there. I mean, who cares for the carers to begin with? You know, where, you know, through no fault of your own, you didn't seek it out, but it came into your life anyway, this dreaded dementia. And there you are having to deal with it, basically untrained.
Yeah, that's true. Nick's has lost a huge amount of skills over the years and quite quickly, but he is still positive. And I know that if I didn't organise all the activities that we do on a daily basis, now he would just be sitting there. He at the moment he can't even switch the TV on. So, but he still has a sense of humour. There is still a lot of Nick left there, And I'm quite convinced that it's by keeping him engaged and continuing to carry on with our lives as best we can, living well with dementia in the way we can, that has been the most important thing, and is the thing that is keeping him going.
Yeah.
And it's keeping me going, keeping our relationship alive.
Yeah. If you could have had, maybe this is a question you thought of, but if you could have had an array of support when Nick got his diagnosis, what would that look like to you?
I
What would
think
sorry, go on.
it would have been really helpful. I think it's essential that you get the help straight away. We spent 2.5 years sort of like rabbits in the headlights. We really weren't quite sure how we were going to forge a way forward. It was quite difficult because Nick was still working. He had huge responsibilities, so it was difficult to know how we could tell other people. We didn't, before we had organize things ourselves and found a way forward for ourselves. We didn't want sort of gossip going on in the workplace and so on. It was a very, very difficult time. And at that time, Nick was losing so many skills that I was having to step in more and more. I think one of the most difficult things for me at that time was actually taking on his private affairs. You know, he couldn't read or write anymore. He couldn't remember passwords. So I actually had to get hold of those passwords. I mean, with his consent, obviously, but I had to do that. I had to open his emails. I had to open his post. That for me was one of the most difficult stages to, because it was a loss of, I could see it as a loss of his independence. And when I had to authorize the powers of attorney, that was also another very difficult step for me, because I felt almost as though I were robbing him of his independence. I wasn't, because he knew what I was doing and he was right behind me, but it was very difficult. I think I've come to terms with that part now, and we are going forward, and we are carrying on.
Yeah, I mean, but young onset. I was diagnosed at 55, like Nick.
Right.
And
Yeah.
Keith was exactly the same, and Alison, you were exactly the same. I mean, it gives different kinds of, as well as the to deal with the dementia, you have to deal with the practicalities of paying the mortgage or making sure, and all these things. People at the memory services don't talk about,
I think we're quite fortunate to have a young onset dementia National Health Service team. I feel very fortunate to live in an area where that is available. But I think generally in society, dementia in younger people really isn't recognised or understood.
Yeah. And early onset in particular, because you don't look like you've got dementia.
No, that's right.
I mean, I've got diabetes. Do I look like I've got diabetes? I mean, that's the thing. There's some comments here in the chat box. Thank you, Karen. This type of individual help for you and Nick should be available to all. I agree with that. Without support for care partners, people with dementia cannot carry on. That's from Julie Hayden. And a longer from Steve Kennedy from Northern Ireland. He's concerned about the length of time it gets to actually get the diagnosis. I mean, my journey was 5 years, but that's a lot of that is because of me being the type of person I am, the lack of acceptance. But if you read his comments, I won't read them out to you because it's quite a long but very interesting comment. If you read it in the chat box, Steve, I agree with almost everything you say, except that things are not better on the mainland. But I do agree with almost everything that you say. Well, thank you, Karen. I mean, I suppose there is no magic formula, is there? It's all down to individual needs. But what is what is obvious to me, has been to me since I've been involved in this kind of stuff, is that when you talk about one person with a diagnosis, it's not one person, it's everybody in that person's circle. It could be 10 or 15 people affected by that person's dementia. And that's sometimes a thing the planners and the bean counters sort of forget to address, that it impacts the whole family.
Yeah.
And one person's role in that family totally changes from wife, confidant to carer. And that's an expectancy that only women get, by the way. It's not the expectancy that men get. You know, we can get away with it, I suppose. But women are seen as really sort of kind of, you know, expected to take on the caring role. Thank you so much, Karen. Thank you for sharing that with us. Very insightful. And I'll go moving on to Alison Batchelor now. Alison, how are you? Good morning.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. And thank you so much for the opportunity of coming on to this today. And it's been an absolute pleasure to listen to both Keith and to Karen and their stories. Basically, I was 56 when I got my diagnosis, but for 5 years, probably before that, I knew things were not right. But being a woman, it was put down to the menopause for the first couple of years of that. And I've heard that quite a lot. You know, that was what was explored, and it couldn't possibly be anything else because of your age. Eventually was sent along to be assessed and with scans and whatever. As I say, at 56 in 2017, I got the diagnosis of Alzheimer's. And that was probably equal measure of relief and being terrified. I honestly felt my life was over. I thought that was it. This was the beginning of the end, that I had nothing more to give or nothing more to live for. And I honestly thought within a matter of weeks, I would be sitting in a corner somewhere in a very bad way. As I say, before my diagnosis, I had worked as a sign language interpreter, but had stopped working about 3 years before I got the diagnosis, because I could no longer process the information. I could no longer take one language in to give another language out, or vice versa. So by that stage, I had stopped work. The consultant who delivered the diagnosis was very nice and explained things as best as she could explain it, but was told to go and put our affairs in order. My husband and myself both looked at each other and thought, what exactly does that mean? What does that look like? You know, how do we do that? And somebody who's a member of Dementia, and that I am a member of, actually was told that as well, and told the consultant, but I've never had an affair. How can I put it in order? So as I say, we went away from that room, but thankfully the consultant was really good and referred me on to the dementia navigator over here, who came out to see my husband and myself. And again, very quickly, I was put in contact with an organization called Dementia NI, and had a visit from their empowerment officer, and was very soon in my first empowerment group. And with being in that and getting the peer support that I so desperately needed, I honestly felt my life changed within half an hour being in that room, because I was given hope. I had the opportunity to speak to others who knew exactly where my head was at, and the difficulties I was having, and the challenges that I was facing, and was able to give tips of how to keep going and how to keep living, really. And also give me the confidence again that my voice could still be heard, and that I had the right to still use my voice and to challenge things and to hopefully break down some of the stigma that was around a dementia diagnosis and what that looked like, and for organizations to sort of challenge the services that they were offering, and to educate and to hopefully to move things on. And as I say, one of my mantras is, you know, for people not to presume I know what I need or want, but to ask me. And that took a lot of challenge for my husband as well, for him to have to learn that he couldn't presume I needed him to do something. I may need support with doing it. Things were going to be different, definitely. But I still wanted to be able to cook. I still wanted to be able to bake, but I needed a bit of support to do that, rather than somebody else doing that for me. And I think it was somebody on the chat earlier, I think it was maybe Chris even, had said, you know, that we focus on what we can do, not what we can't. And I think that is a really positive thing to live by, you know, that yes, there's things I can no longer do, and I'll never be able to redo them again, but there's so many things that I can still do. And there's new things I have learned to do. You know, so dementia diagnosis does not mean that you cannot learn new skills with the right sort of support. But there's some things you just have to, you let go of. And my life would not be complete in any shape or form without the whiteboard, without my very detailed calendar of events. Everything is wrote down for every day, and that keeps me as independent as I can be, because I can look at that and I know exactly what's happening, when it's happening, where it's happening, what time I need to be somewhere, you know. So that gives me a focus, it plans out the day. And I think, again, it was Keith that said about, you know, initially on diagnosis, you don't plan to do things next year or later on this year because you may not be in the state of doing it. I no longer live like that. I have things booked for this time next year, and I will live as best as I can to be able to still do them. But my attitude is now, if things change so dramatically that I can't, then that's fine. But I'm going to not live my life by not planning, and then the event comes around and I regret not having taken up the challenge of actually booking to go to that. I love the theatre, and Les Miserables is coming to Northern Ireland for the first time. I've seen it in London, and it's not coming until more than a year from today, but we've got tickets for that. And my hope will be that I will be able to go to that I will still very much be able to, you know, to enjoy that. And I do live by the mantra of regretting nothing. I live every day as best that I can. I've learned coping strategies, and a lot of that has come through peer support and, you know, again, getting the confidence sort of from others. And as I say, nobody knows what today or tomorrow will bring. As I say, absolutely none of us know what state we're going to be in later on today or tomorrow morning when we're waking up. And as I say, I just live each day as if it could potentially be my last day. But I enjoy every second of it. And as I say, my husband is a fantastic support. He really, really is. But I never refer to him as my carer. He's my husband. And yes, he does care for me, but then I care for him. And obviously I acknowledge full-heartedly that he has much more to do for myself than he would have had before my diagnosis, and I appreciate that. But he's my husband, and that's what I want him to be. Yes, it's different. The relationship slightly different. We've had to adjust. We've had to adapt. But we still enjoy each other's company. We make the best of the situation, and he gets support that he needs, and I have the peer support that I need.
Thank you, Alison. Can I ask you a couple of, is it possible for you to sort of illustrate how the first couple of years with your diagnosis felt to you?
Yeah, a bit lost and floundering our way sort of through it. As I say, I was pretty fortunate that I got the peer support very, very quickly. And through having that sort of peer support, they were able to signpost us to things that I probably, without that wouldn't have found too much later on the journey. So I think before the diagnosis was much more challenging for us than immediately after.
Yeah. I mean, there's some comments here. Well done, Alison. Well spoken, Alison. Before dementia, we never met, and now I would consider you a wonderful friend. That's from Steve Kennedy. And I think that's one of the positive sides of, if there is a positive side, but certainly is that it kind of expands your friendship circle, doesn't it?
It big time. As I say, I would honestly say, and Steve would agree with this, on dementia, and the members in that, I know without a shadow, I can pick up the phone or message them at any point, at any time, and they will be there. And they know exactly where you're at, and they know exactly what challenges you're having. I was pretty fortunate. I didn't lose friends. I know other people did lose friends after their diagnosis. I didn't. But the friends I've made from Dementia and it's another family group, and it's a family group that you can totally rely on. It's something you can't sort of explain.
Yeah. Peer support is a big issue, and I think it's the best kind of support. But sometimes, sometimes people, especially early on, feel awkward about approaching other people, because it then raises the expectancies that some of your questions will be answered and they're not. But friendships are so important. Relationships are so important to maintain after diagnosis, both for yourself and for the people who care for you as well. Because
definitely. Definitely.
There's this myth about respite care, isn't it? That it's a big building where you send somebody for a couple of weeks. Well, in fact, it just might be somewhere where a loved one goes for half an hour or an hour while you have your hair done and change the tires, But it might just be that, mightn't it? I mean, it's that simple. As a general question to the panel, do you think we overcomplicate dementia care? Yeah, Karen, you're mute.
I think the dementia care is actually very complicated. I'm dealing with it now, and I'm constantly having to change it. It's because you're relying on people and relationships. They're coming into your home. I find it very difficult and quite hard to navigate. I feel I've been very lucky. I have found some very very good people, and I've built up relationships with them. I've come to know them very, very well. They've become friends, but it's a bit of a roller coaster to get the right help at the right time, especially as the challenges change. And so those helping perhaps 2-3 years ago are no longer able to cope now, but have remained friends with us, and I've had to move on and find other support. So no, I think it's really complicated, and I wish I had more help with that, but I haven't. I seem to have to do that myself, really.
Yeah. Keith.
Yeah, I agree with Karen. It is complicated. And of course, everyone is unique and different, and we all seek person-centered care and support. But what I would say is that, and resources, of course, are thinly stretched. So more resources, more money would certainly
Yeah.
help, but it's not the sole answer. I think what alongside the additional resources are to examine where there is good practice, and there is some good practice out there. And Karen spoke about some of that this morning with regards to the young onset service near where she lives, and then to extend that, to take the good practice and to make it more widely available. It's not rocket science, really. There's a lot of head scratching and thinking, well, what do we do to make things better? Well, often if people look and listen and think and process, it's out there already.
Yeah.
It's a case of being able to utilize that.
Yeah. Alison.
Yeah, no, and Chris had put up, and it just sort of sparked some. It is very much a postcode lottery, even over in Northern Ireland. You know, where I live up towards Belfast, our diagnosis, and it's still a bit sort of complicated, it's still a bit sort of hit or miss and can take some time. But if you live where Steve lives, who's one of the, you know, on the participants on the screen this morning, it's an absolute nightmare. You know, they have somebody flown in down towards Enniskillen direction who is there for one afternoon a week, gives a diagnosis, and then clears back off to England.
Yeah.
You know, and people are left, you know, with nothing. And that's only what, a 2-hour drive away at most. You know, but just different boards, different healthcare, you know, and I am in the Southeastern Trust, but if you're in the Southern Trust, it's completely different again. If you're in the Northern Trust, it's different again. And like the size of Northern Ireland is nothing, but we have so much of a postcode lottery here. It's unreal. And I'm sure it's the same with yourselves, you know, different parts of England, Scotland, and Wales. You know, in one area you'll get fantastic service, and in another area there's nothing. And it's just not right. You know, it has to be the same for everybody.
Yeah. The leadership is lacking sometimes when they develop services. The best way to develop services, of course, is to co-produce them with the people who are using the service.
Yeah.
You know, because you guys are the experts, really, on your own dementia, or those who are loved one.
I was going to say, I think there should be much more emphasis given to creative arts support therapy,
I agree.
Alternative therapies, because at the moment there isn't any medication really that can treat this condition. But the alternative therapies really help, and there is evidence that these therapies will help. And I think they need to be more recognised and better funded, or available to everybody with dementia and carers. We benefit so much. Nick and I benefit so much from some of the local support groups in our area.
Yeah.
I know that that's not universal.
But I know you're spot on. And I say, when you see the artwork that Keith produces, and there's another lady, Gail, who Keith would be aware of and Nigel would be aware of, and her artwork is absolutely amazing. And I know for Gail, that was all learned through after her diagnosis with dementia. And I'm not sure when Keith sort of started, but there's another lady, Dory, and again, her started after she was diagnosed. And it is such a way of expressing yourself and just relaxing and being able to do something with your partner as well. You know, something that you can share. It's a lovely activity.
Absolutely.
And also, in answer to your question there, Alison, 2 years ago is when I
Right.
started. I didn't pick a paintbrush between the age of 11 and 65, apart from to paint walls and ceilings. On paper is now much more fun because the other's beyond me now, I'm afraid, but I can do it on paper.
There's a couple of comments, very complimentary for Hilary Doxford. Thank you, Karen. Really helpful to your perspective. I sometimes take my husband too much for granted. I couldn't survive without him. People who live alone with it don't know how they cope.
No, absolutely.
Yeah, I live alone, but you can't live alone. I live alone, but I'm not alone, if you know what I mean. I've got an informal circle around me. Otherwise, my life would be a tragedy. It really would. Not a tragedy in that terms, you know, a tragedy about getting things done, really. Julie says good dementia care should be about good person-centered care, regardless of the condition. I think that's absolutely right. And she agrees with you about Karen, about the use of art. There is a problem, I think, with delivering. You know, people are expected to wrap around the services. The services do not wrap around the person.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big issue. Can I thank you all for an amazing hour? It's just flown by. And the participants, thank you so much. To the audience, thank you so much for being part of this. We'll be back here in a fortnight. I don't know what the subject is yet. I think we have got that to discuss, but we'll be back in a fortnight. So keep a marker in your diary. Watch out for the email. And the comments keep on coming in. Thank you all for another excellent webinar. Well done. Despite the topic, I love listening to you all. Thank you, folks. You were great. What a wonderful panel with amazing subjects. There you go. Emily McCarthy, thank you for all your perspectives. It's been extremely insightful. And the message I gathered was how important mindset is. Michael Nichols, thank you so much to all of you for sharing your experience. Again, mostly insightful. Now, my thanks. It's brilliant to chair a panel as engaged as you are. Not that our panels aren't engaged normally, but this is really good in a very difficult subject. Because it brings the emotions out, and it's something. Some of the quotes for all of you would live long in my memory because, you know, I carry you showed what it's like to move from a wife to a carer. It wasn't your choice; it just happened. And Alison, the fact that your determination not to be defined by your dementia, and you, Keith, about your journey. How their milestones impact you so much. So, thank you all. Keith.
Sorry, Nigel, to interrupt you as you're closing. Just to say to the audience, thank you for coming today. It has been a real pleasure speaking with you this morning, and it has been a fabulous webinar, no question about that. And it will be placed on the Three Nations website. So do tell your friends, do tell other people that this one sits alongside many others on the website. And I really cannot commend them too strongly to you, because all of what Karen, Alison and myself have been speaking about today is there for other people to benefit from too.
Yes, and it's the authentic voice of dementia. Authentic. It comes from people living the life and living the dream. So if all the participants could log off, and thank you so much again from me, and we look forward to seeing you in a fortnight's time.